Welcome to Real Herbalism Radio, show 292, recorded at Big Dog Studios in Eugene, Oregon. Today's show is made possible by TheRealHerbMarket.com. Are you looking for a store that specializes in herbal products for health, beauty, your home, and even magic? TheRealHerbMarket.com is that store. MudPod Design. Is your site ADA compliant? Do you know if it is? MudPod Design can help you by running a free website accessibility audit. Just go to mudpoddesign.com/free-ADA-audit today. As modern herbalists, we often focus on the healing properties of the plants, and we've narrowed our definition of healing to mainly physicality of life. That's not how it always was. Before, the plants let us see healing in a much bigger way. Today we're talking with Deatra Cohen and Adam Siegel, authors of Ashkenazi Herbalism, Rediscovering the Herbal Traditions of Eastern European Jews, about seeing the plants from a broader healing perspective. Now, here are your hosts.
I'm Candace Hunter.
I'm Patrick Hunter.
And welcome to Real Herbalism Radio. Welcome back, Deatra and Adam.
Thank you, Candace and Patrick. Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
I am so excited to have you guys back because, after talking with you last time, I just started thinking even more about that intermix of spirit and herbs and physicality and what Eastern Europe and the Ashkenazi herbalists and healers were really working with. And it's fascinating to me. So, that's what I want to talk about today.
Let's get right into it.
It's definitely a kind of lost in the ethers way of helping ourselves and each other. So much of what we discovered is something that doesn't really exist anymore. Yeah. And yet it's something that almost feels like we need it more than ever.
Yes, that's been part of the area of herbalism as I've studied over the last, 20 years, that's been feeling almost like it's standing just outside the sight line. I can feel it there, but I can't quite see it. I'm trying to make that connection, and it's challenging. It's really challenging.
Yeah. For me, it's, I wrote the book from the perspective of being, somebody from a specific, culture and ethnicity, but it's also often always associated with with a religion, which is Judaism. And I wasn't raised religiously at all. So, a lot of what I researched was all new to me and really foreign, because I wasn't familiar with it. I hadn't grown up with it. And so I hadn't been around it. And yet, I also have my own kind of beliefs, that probably are really not like what my ancestors believed and practiced. But at the same time, I don't know, I feel like religion's a very personal thing. And so for me, it's more about feeling connected with other people and our environment and the world and the planet and the universe, and just feeling like we're all part of this one energy and this one mystery. And so I appreciate a lot of how that also translates into how the Ashkenazi healers worked with plants in their own spirituality and brought all that together to make people feel like they were part of a larger community, and in that way to heal, and to help the community heal. I don't know if that's kind of like a jumbled way of getting into this, but I hope it makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah, as we study the herbs today, or at least my experience of studying the plants has been that there's nods to energetics, and oftentimes energetics is reframed into trying to understand a physical manifestation of whatever the energetic energy might be. And
Right.
there's nods to spiritual elements of the plants, things like the doctrine of signatures and things like that. They nod at it, but they don't really talk about what that means and what the deeper knowledge is. And I feel like, based on what I read in Ashkenazi herbalism, but also it just seems like there's like this intuitive feeling or that there was a deeper understanding, and that it was practiced, herbalism and healing was practiced from a much broader perspective in that community and in that time than what we currently are practicing in, as it were.
Yeah, for sure. The further you go back, when the Baal Hashem were practicing, they drew from Kabbalah, and that had a lot more spiritual aspects to it, and I think that, from what I understood, that they were doing was choosing plants and other healing modalities that were more tied in with that realm, the more spiritual realms. And then after the Enlightenment, that was something that was kind of dismissed more, especially in medicine, which is part of the sciences, which was the focus of Enlightenment thought. And so a lot of that started to get stripped out, and it didn't happen until later in the Pale of Settlement among the Ashkenazim, but it did happen there. And the Baal Hashem eventually kind of faded out and were replaced by other kinds of healers that were more I want to say scientific, although before they became formally trained, they were also traditional healers, and those would have been the Felchers. But all these people used plants, and the Felchers before, and probably even after the formal training, they all were very kind of wedded to and really committed to Judaism and traditional practices. And so that never really, I don't think that ever really went away in the shtetls and the Jewish communities. I think as far as the Felchers were concerned, that was also always an aspect of, how they approached healing. Do you want to add to that?
Oh, yeah. Right. There's so much complex stuff that went on when we were really having to delve into that. That's all like in part one of Ashkenazi herbalism, just telling the story of Jewish science and Jewish medicine in Eastern Europe and trying to sort of contextualize it, but also decontextualize it from, the religious traditions or the received, there's like the Orthodox, not in the sense of Orthodox Judaism, but just, this is religion and that is superstition. This is science and that is superstition. This is what's real and that's a bunch of quackery. And that comes at you from every angle when you get at this. And it's, it's not enough that you've got healers who are being dismissed by medical doctors, or academy trained physicians, but they're also being dismissed by the religious leaders in the community. And there's an enormous amount of sort of inherent sexism in all this as well, which comes out, and it made us, certainly, I'm speaking for Deatra now, much more appreciative of the extent to which, traditional knowledge of the most deeply rooted kind was preserved and maintained and kept strong within the community, despite, in fact, a lot of the time, I mean, in among especially in the smaller towns, in the shtetls and the villages, it was sort of a mutual antipathy. Somebody who'd gone off to St. Petersburg to train as a doctor was not going to take up a post in some little podunk town. They wanted to be in St. Petersburg or Moscow. And it was fine because the people in the village didn't want them.
Right.
They were not really, they charge.
Yeah.
They fee for service. We've got perfectly good healers right here who we know we work with, and their way of healing us and treating us is completely antithetical to how things are done by the people who come out of the Western tradition.
Yeah, that whole the Enlightenment. Sometimes it makes me kind of chuckle to think of the imagery of what we're saying here, enlightening, but at the same time, it isn't. I mean, it's really more the separation, because it's about separating science from religion, from separating everything into its separate boxes, and then strictly defining what's allowed to be in each box, and then trying to throw away everything else, which is an important part perhaps of a development of thought, but it's also a painful and damaging part of development of thought.
Yeah.
It was like they're so mutually exclusive that they can't even exist together. They can't even inform each other. And even today, when you think about Western medicine, it rarely, if ever, acknowledges that it comes out of this.
Yes.
It's a direct descendant of the traditional medicine and the traditional knowledge of plants. And going further, pharmacology, pharmacy goes into native lands and, I hate to say it, but steals this knowledge and brings it back and makes a profit off of it. I mean, they go to these indigenous communities and study their healers and what they're doing, and they take the knowledge back, the plants back, and they reconstitute it.
They tear them apart even further, and then they isolate parts of them, and then they try to profit off of that. Often creating damage in it, because when you start isolating like that, you also create side effects.
Exactly. I mean, going back to St. John's wort, when you isolate the one constituent, hypericin, and make it something concentrated, it's not helpful in the way that it's touted to be. You need the entire plant synergy to do whatever healing that it's meant to do.
Yes, that is so spot on. Yes.
So it's a continuing problem, and I'm not saying that Western medicine is all bad, because obviously, it's done some amazing things, and I thank it for all kinds of things that it's done for people that I know. But at the same time, the way that it's so exclusive and has been from its very beginnings is just really problematic, when it could really be so much more what would you call that? Just if it would acknowledge the plants and also allow plant knowledge and plant application to be available for people, and just encouraged, when it's appropriate, and so these two schools of thought could coexist and, be more helpful for all different kinds of reasons that we're seeing right now. Like, go ahead.
Right, and they do coexist. I mean, in herbal community, they certainly do.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never talked to anybody, who worked with plants who, like as Deatra just said, didn't, understand that, there's a time when you actually need to go to the hospital, or you need to go to a physician, you need to go to the pharmacy and actually have them, you gotta, there's all kinds, got cancer. There's some things that Western medicine is really good for. And, and we acknowledge that and recognize that and respect that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what I'm seeing happening, just the beginnings of what I think I'm seeing happening in the broader herbal community, is that we're starting to seek that place where the plants we understand the physical aspect of what the plants are doing. We understand some of maybe the chemistry of the why, and that sort of, very scientific formulation or approach to how it works. But we also want to understand those intangible elements that come with the plants that you don't get from a pill or other medical interventions. And more herbalists are starting to draw on those and talk about the fact that they're drawing on those to help their clients. Whereas, in the past, modern herbalists may have done some of that, but they never ever actually mentioned, I'm also choosing this herb because, I'm also choosing the St. John's wort to help this person because I know that they've got some stressors in their lives that are causing some depression and some anxiety swings. And I know that that piece of sunshine that St. John's wort brings to the table will help them on a spiritual level or a more emotional level. And there's other constituents, and I can justify it if I'm talking to them because of the science.
Right.
Herbalists are starting to actually come out and say, well, St. John's wort is good for depression too. It's good when your spirits are low. So this one is the one I want to use with you,
It's true. And also, that's something that Deatra was sort of when you were in school, because I remember you were, what kinds of, I was thinking about like nervines.
Uh-huh.
That that there was, you were definitely in our household. I think probably the remedies that we get the most. And I speak, for me and our son, who, you just made a formula last week for us because we were having some stressors.
Yeah,
it was terrific.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there are definitely plants that I associate with more, more heartfelt situations, or and talking about herbalists who work from that perspective, there are some that are really doing some incredible work, like Sage of Popham. I don't know if you've talked to him. He's amazing. One of my teachers was a guy who I don't think he really is out there as far as like podcasts, but his name is Rylan Sion, and he did a lot of talking about blue vervain, and and just love that plant so much. I just really look to it for just all kinds of just mellowing out, and he had his own explanation for it. But everybody, it's interesting how somebody will talk about a plant for a certain reason, how it affects them, and then you try it yourself and you work with it for a little while, and it's just a completely maybe similar but a totally different experience. And vervain is something that's talked about in one of the sources that we used, Ha Cohen. So it's definitely a plant that the Ashkenazim were aware of, even as many as I think 300-400 years ago. So that's comforting too, to know that there's this long line of connection with the plant. And it's important to try the plants for yourself and to work with them to find exactly, how they manifest in your body, where you feel them and, what kinds of feelings it brings up. And, that's really, for me, that's a spiritual experience,
It is.
It really is.
It's like a form of communion.
Yeah, it
really
is.
Yeah.
So.
It is. And that deep connection, I'm really thankful that you wrote Ashkenazi Herbalism, because I think the tenacity they had in hanging on to that approach and that understanding of the plants is part of what allowed us to have that understanding, to rekindle it and to reawaken to it now, even those of us who are not, from Eastern Europe or of Jewish descent specifically. I mean, it's because they hung on to the energy so long that it didn't have an opportunity to fully dissipate. We didn't completely lose it, even though was a swath of years where it was so far underground it was hiding. Kind of like the mushrooms, the chanterelles hide underground after the forest fire. The mycelium network is still there. It's waiting for the conditions to reappear, and it'll take a couple of decades, but the trees will return, and then the mushrooms will return. And I feel like our trees are finally returning, and the mushrooms of herbal knowledge and all that it's coming back, and
I love it so much that you say that. I can't even tell you. It's just like, oh God, I can't believe it. You said it. You put words to like a feeling, that I've had. And it is amazing how like strongly they held on to that no matter what, until the end. It's just, I don't know. There are no words for that. How does that happen? I mean, when everything that you're being told is no, 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 right. And yet you cling to it because that, it's your connection with life and with the earth. And it's just, I don't know. That is amazing. That's an amazing thing that you point out. So thank you. Thank you for bringing that to light.
Yeah, thank you for doing the research and helping all of us get to share and understanding some of this history, because I mean, the way they understood the plants was unique and beautiful, and it was so informed. I mean, for a long time, that's, superstition, blah, 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 people, blow it up. But the fact is, even the uneducated folk healers understood the plants from an incredibly informed and knowledgeable base just because of where they were and how they were learning.
How do you know you're hitting the big time? When you see folks wearing your logo out and about. Ace High Graphics can help you get your logo out there with custom design apparel, like hats and hoodies and tees with custom bags and more. Ace High Graphics can do small runs as little as 10 items or hundreds to meet your needs. We'll help you be seen no matter how large or small you are. Visit acehighgraphics.com today.
Yeah, and one thing that I wanted to say was I was taking notes about this, but even like the Yibo, which is it's a classic encyclopedia of the Jews who lived in Eastern Europe. So there's a Yibo encyclopedia online, and one of the first things that I found was the entry for health and healing and healers, and they talk about, just matter-of-factly how, they were very reliant on the plants up until the very end, but they never really say how important that was. They just kind of gloss over it. And then kind of a more obscure source that I found was an article or an essay by a guy named Richard Rubin about, these people that he found in a retirement home or in Florida after the war in the 70s. And this group of people talked about the plants, just very matter-of-factly, like, oh yes, we had asafoetida for, keeping colds away. And we, had garlic, and we had chamomile for this and raspberry leaves for that. And it's just like, it's just amazing to me that nobody, thought to really, talk to these people and find out about their knowledge. I mean, this would have been ethnobotany, but for some reason it wasn't important.
Yes.
And yet
Yeah.
I think we still carry it with us.
Yes.
I've told the story about when, I was, in my 30s, we were living in Berkeley, and we'd walk by this one spot, and I always called this scent the candy smell. And I'm like, where's that coming from? What is that? I must know what it is. And so it wasn't for like a decade later that we had gone to Eastern Europe, and there was a linden tree in bloom, but I didn't know it at the time. But I'm like, and I just walked until I found where it was coming from. And I'm like, oh my God, I feel like I'm home,
Yes.
And linden is one of the plants that was known by Ashkenazim and all the people who lived, in Eastern Europe and Europe. And today I just, it's part of my tea every day. And it makes me feel so much better, because it's moisturizing and it's calming and it's heart medicine. Yeah. And so we carry these things in us, they're part of us. We'll never lose them.
Right.
We just have to be able to tap into, if it's a spiritual thing or a religious thing or a scientific, DNA memory, we have these strands that go back hundreds, if not thousands, 10,000 years, that we've brought with us. And
I think you are absolutely right about that. And I mean, for me, one of the things is garlic. I mean, I would not live my life without garlic. That would be wrong. And I have felt there have been a few people I've run into in my life who had an allergy or were unable to eat garlic or other alliums. And anytime I run into that, I just have this like wave of like grief for them. Like, how can you live with feeling that exposed and that, because garlic is protective. It's such a strong, protective, sturdy little fellow. He's just right there. I mean? So,
and carry it with you.
Well, don't tell Patrick. I have done a couple of times. I carry it along because, but that weird attitude toward the plants is, I think, probably very much akin to the Ashkenazi people and the other people who were living in that area, not just the Jewish people, but all of the people there. The knowing that this plant, this garlic is a good and protective one. It's going to keep the vampires away, and you want that.
Best marketing slogan ever. Eat this, no vampires.
Yeah, well, that's a thing.
Nice.
There's another herbalist that you might want to talk to named Dory Midnight, who she's Sephardi and Ashkenazi, so she's got both sides, and she is really big on garlic, and she talks about garlic a lot. And you can ask Adam. We have garlic almost every day.
Oh yeah. Yeah, because you can't live safely without it.
Vampires.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, we take it, to breathe out the fumes and kind of clear out our lungs every day.
Oh my gosh, I remember being in high school, and my family ate a reasonable amount of garlic. My mom wasn't as strong about these things as I am, let's just say. But garlic was a part of our life. And I remember my sister complaining that she didn't want to have garlic because then her breath would smell bad. And I remember even back then thinking, so what? If he still wants to kiss you, then he's the kind of guy you want. Why would you want someone who doesn't eat garlic?
Totally.
You say that, but wasn't it always it was your father's side that did the headed garlic at Christmas?
Yes, that was a tradition. And it wasn't a head. Every midnight, all the men at midnight on Christmas Eve, I believe it was before midnight mass, but it might have been right after, had to eat a clove of raw garlic either before or after.
Oh, it was a clove?
It was a clove, a single
Whatever.
clove.
Oh.
And I don't remember if the women did it too, because
Like
I was
chew it?
too young. Yeah, they just like chew it right up. No problem.
Oh.
I mean, Patrick and I tried that once. It was not midnight mass. It was much earlier in the evening. But we didn't get very far with one clove of garlic each.
Well, yeah, raw garlic. Yeah,
Yeah, it was sharp.
very.
You know,
Although-
I learned something in school about like if you don't want to have garlic breath, but you want to get all the benefits
Mhm.
of it, you know, coming through your lungs and clearing out whatever pathogens, you can cut up one clove really small and then just swallow it like pills.
Mm,
And,
yeah.
and it does the same thing. You don't get the garlic breath, and it doesn't upset your stomach
No.
at all. So that's another.
That's a good
one of our
one.
nearly daily
Yeah.
rituals.
Yeah.
That sounds like a really good one for the younger dating set. I think
Yes,
that would be
exactly.
smart. Yeah.
Not antisocial at all.
We check in with each other afterward.
Yeah, smell
Yeah.
Oh, but I love what you said about linden. I mean, that is one of those ones that I find myself coming back to every time I'm traveling, which obviously hasn't been, very much in the last, year and a half, but I find myself coming back to it, and it does feel like home. And my ancestors are from Poland. So I'm thinking, well, that like gives me this like happy, renewed feeling like, oh, I need to look into this a little further and see, because, maybe that's part of where that connection is. Because it's not something that my mom was making. She didn't make herbal tea. She only made, black tea. Lipton. I mean, so,
It was new for me too, but that smell was something that I didn't know where it was coming from, but I knew there was something about it. You know how smells are.
Yeah.
Suddenly, like, man, you've got this huge memory of something. You don't even know where it came from.
Yeah.
But it could be, like garlic,
Yeah.
or anything that you might, a cooking smell, or
like rye bread.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah.
I always see.
Yeah. So you have to pay attention to those scents that,
Yes.
kind of waft by and catch you.
Yes, and I have been feeling for the past few years, actually, like now is the time for some deep healing for the peoples and the energies of Eastern Europe, and especially, all that happened in World War I and World War II, and there's so much, damage, so much tragedy, so much grief, so much loss. And I feel like we've been in this place of healing that, pulling those, ancestral memories up. And we've gone through a lot of, or at least I've gone through a lot of like dreams and sorrows and experiences where the hard parts of that have come up, and I've had to sit in witness of them and feel through it. And having the joy that came through in your book, in Ashkenazi Herbalism, having the joy and the caring that the people had for the plants and for each other and for their place, makes that it's like it's time to move past looking at the really hard, deep, painful parts and into the let's remember the joyful parts too. Let's remember the love. Let's remember the wisdom. And I think the timing for your book coming out, I think, is absolutely beautiful in terms of the greater healing energy of moving that energy.
Yeah, we feel like that too.
Yeah, because you can take it with you. That's the thing. Is like I think that that's the 26 plants.
Yes.
We're Deatra spent a lot of time, deciding what to include, because obviously there could have been 100.
Oh yeah.
It was what are representative of these traditions, and what can you continue to use? What are plants that are sort of well known and well understood and widely available, and they constitute sort of a portable materia medica that you can take with you, and that's going to connect you to, these vanished communities or this vanished world. It's not vanished because you're carrying it with you now.
Yeah. It's just remembering how to look at it. I mean, it's like we've had blinders. Since the Enlightenment, we've all been wearing blinders, and now we can take them off. We don't have to wear them anymore.
I agree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna be the dumb one in the room. You said that word 3 times. I'm not the only one. When and how? More information on enlightenment.
Oh gosh. Well, there's I guess broadly speaking, the Enlightenment is a period that runs from maybe the mid 17th century and up until the early 19th century, depending on where in Europe you are, which is sort of an embrace of rationalism, logic, scientific investigation, the scientific method. You think about people like, Descartes or Cartesian logic to Darwin to, it's basically the entire sort of invention of the world of modern progress as we understand it today. Technological advances, sequestration of religion. Religion now goes over here, and then there's like the real world, and that's basically the Enlightenment.
Okay. So when I heard that, I was like, they can't be referring to the Renaissance. This is something different. So that's why I asked, and I'm sure if I had the question, other people had it. So that's why. Okay. Talk amongst yourselves.
And there was a Jewish Enlightenment in Eastern Europe called the Haskalah, which again, sort of, if you read Ashkenazi Herbalism, you can sort of see that the impact that the Jewish Enlightenment, the Haskalah, had on traditional ways in Eastern European Jewish communities. A lot of the same, you can imagine that if the common denominator for, Enlightenment thought is, we have to do away with anything we deem, quote, superstitious. And you can't see my air quotes, but I'm making air quotes. And that certainly was brought to bear. But one of the saving graces was most of Eastern Europe and most of these communities were so poor and isolated and sort of cut off from the sort of the centers of, it's one thing to sit around in Warsaw or Moscow or St. Petersburg or Vienna and opine about, these benighted Jews in the shtetls, but as long as you don't go out there to wag your finger at them and tell them how benighted they are, they're not going to pay any attention to you.
They were very practical in that way, weren't they? They were just kind of like, we're going to do what we're going to do, and you guys can have whatever you say about it. They just. And
the same was, in all those communities. I mean, it really is. I was sort of glad, as we were sort of like discussing like the role of spirituality.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things about Eastern Europe in general is that it's, a lot of, it was like the last part of Europe to be converted to Christianity. Places like Lithuania or Latvia weren't even the 14th century, and there is a much more sort of holistic, syncretic preservation and appreciation for practices, spiritual and other and religious and other forms of observance that really have nothing to do with Christianity or Judaism or Islam, because there's Muslim communities there as well. And I think that's definitely one of the common denominators that makes Eastern European herbal traditions, of which Ashkenazi traditions are but a part, such an interesting and far more deserving of wider study, phenomenon. It's a phenomenon.
All right.
Well, there's so much to think about. There. I mean, there's a lot to think about. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And on a podcast, you can't leave that space.
Oh, no.
No. Well, that's our next book.
I will be looking forward to that because, I mean, there's so much there. There really is so much there. And the plants, just like plants grow in so many different communities and so many different types. I mean, the Ashkenazi herbalists brought so many. There were so many pieces they brought to the table, and they picked up so much. They weren't afraid to try out something new. And I think that's part of the magic of, and the mystery of the plants and the herbalism that they held on to. And I'm thankful for it.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, there's a little bit of compare and contrast where you can clearly see, like, we did enough comparative stuff. Like, here are communities that we suspect we know were mostly Ashkenazi.
Yeah.
And they used the plants in this way. But in the meantime, their Ukrainian neighbors were using the plants, in a slightly different way. Maybe it could have been something as simple as somebody had a copy of Dioscorides and knew the Western European tradition as opposed to somebody else. Another thing that was really interesting was that one of the really hugely, like, charged symbolic plants for Ukrainians and Russians is Gilder rose.
Oh.
Dog rose, right? Gilder rose.
I don't think it's dog rose.
No, it's good. That's
Gilder rose.
Yeah, and that was not. We didn't find that used at all in the Ashkenazi communities that we studied in the book.
No.
Yeah, that is really interesting.
That was like a tell because these are ostensibly communities that have a large ethnic Ukrainian population. They would probably be using Gilder rose, but I forget what's its
I can't remember the Linnaean name.
I'll look it up.
We'll have that in our show notes.
I did want to say that plants belong to themselves, and they're their own beings, and that they don't discriminate between different peoples. So they can't really be claimed by any one people. They're their own, and they belong to the world. And plants have brought people together in the past for healing, for food, for all kinds of things. And after doing all this work and research, it really feels like plants could bring people together now and into the future. And that's one of my biggest hopes and wishes, is that people would see how lovely and how beautiful the plants are and how they can do this, for us and for themselves and for the planet.
Yeah, part of the healing that I felt as I was reading your book, and especially looking at the monograph section, is that you have, a little section on the various different ways, the lenses through which the plant's been viewed. From Western practice, it was used this way. In the Ashkenazim, they used it that way. And those many perspectives are all about this one being. It's, and in that way, it feels like that's a coming together of all these peoples around this one plant. This is the community this plant has drawn to itself, is all of these different ways of looking at it. So it's deeply healing, and it's a bringing together and a reawakening to the fact that this is all the plant. It's all of it. So
yeah. What's amazing to me is, like, some of the plants had similar applications from, totally disparate places. Like, I can't remember exactly which plant it was, but the people in the Pale were using it in the same way as Native Americans.
Yeah.
And that
Lepidium?
it was a Lepidium, the Lepidium genus. And so that was just, and it wasn't like just a general usage or knowledge. It was like a really specific thing, which I can't think of right now, but it was just amazing to me that just, this knowledge is so, like, just similar and yet, very unique, the world over.
Yeah, it's humbling. It's, as a human being, it's very humbling to know that this plant is a teacher, and it is taught across the entire world, multiple places, multiple times, and the message is consistent.
right, and that people have gone to it for their health. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. My articulation.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so how can people find you, and how can people get your book?
We have a website. It's ashkenaziherbalism.net, all one word. I post things on there, not regularly, but enough that you might want to check back there under the blog. There's a blog section. And these are things that probably aren't in the book. So one of the things that actually one of our readers asked us to do is to transliterate some of the Yiddish the Yiddish pronunciations for the plants. So you can find that on our blog. And so that's on the blog. I also set up an Instagram. Yay. So sometimes I post stuff on there that's not on the blog. And we also have a Facebook page, and they're all under Ashkenazi Herbalism. And if you're interested in the book, you can purchase it. We hope you purchase it from an independent bookstore. If you'd like to go to a library, many libraries have bought it. You can do interlibrary loan, or even ask your local library to buy a copy of it.
Yeah, definitely do that. Ask them to buy a copy.
Yes, as a former librarian, and you as a current librarian, yes, please do ask.
Tell librarians. Oh, yes. We like it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, with that,
put an herb on it.
Herb on it.
Put an herb on it.
The statements made about herbs and products on this podcast have not been evaluated by the United States Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease. All information provided on this podcast or any affiliated websites is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for advice from your physician or other healthcare professional. You should not use the information on this podcast and its affiliated websites for a diagnosis or treatment of any health problem. Always consult with a healthcare professional before starting any new vitamins, supplements, diet, or exercise program before taking any medication, or if you have or suspect you might have a health problem. Any testimonials, questions, or case studies are based on individual results and do not constitute a guarantee that you will achieve the same results.